If yesterday was a challenge, today is a battle, tomorrow will be an incredible experience. A brand new year, 2016, the 1st of January in the year 2016. We meet you tonight on Face the Nation. A very happy new year to all our viewers. You have 365 days to write your new book. Ensure that you write it wisely, be proud of it, and ensure that you write a good one by the end of this year. Our topic of discussion today revolves around women's rights. Let me introduce our guests this evening. On to my left is Madhuri Naika, Director, HIV AIDS and Advocacy, Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. Also joining us this evening is Chamatya Fernando, National Coordinator, Stop the Violence Campaign, World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. Also joining us this evening is Ambika Sadgurunathan, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. She works as the Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. So let's start off with Ambika. Before that, Sudarshana Gunawardhan, Attorney at Law, Executive Director, Rights Now Collective for Democracy, is to join us. The only male in the panel. We're talking about women's rights today. So let's see what Sudarshana has to say. We will be joined shortly. He will be joining us shortly as well. Let's start off with Ambika Sadgurunathan, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. She is the Commissioner. Starting off, what is the role of the Human Rights Commission in Sri Lanka when it comes to women's rights? Your time starts now.
The role of the Human Rights Commission generally is the protection and promotion of human rights, and in relation to that, we can receive complaints and inquire into complaints related to fundamental rights. We can advise the government on a number of things, that is law reform, on ratification of international treaties, etc. So that is generally the role. So where women's rights are concerned, the Commission will be undertaking a few activities. One is that it will be forming a few subcommittees along with civil society to look at a few issues, and in particular to focus on groups that have been marginalized or are discriminated against. So one of those subcommittees will be gender, that will be looking at the issues faced by women. And the purpose of collaborating with civil society is because civil society has actually been working on this issue for decades. They have a lot of experience, and we believe that a joint effort, whether it's advocacy for law reform or any other issue, would be stronger. We will also be looking at migrant workers, and as you know, a large portion of migrant workers are women. And we will be advocating, we hope to, for the enactment of the Women's Commission Act. This is once again there have been various drafts that have been prepared over the years, but it has not been enacted. Then one of our other areas of focus is, of course, transitional justice, where we see our role as twofold. And once again, this will also impact on women, because one of our aims is to ensure that any process that is set up by the state is inclusive and it is participatory. And since a large portion of the conflict affected are women, we want to ensure that their voices are heard and not left out. Then socioeconomic rights. This is also another area that we hope to look at. And as you may know, women tend to be the majority in, let's say, the informal sector, whether it's domestic workers. Women also experience a lot of marginalization where livelihood is concerned, because we have a large population of women-headed households, about 1.2 in the country, and about 58,000 in total in the north. So we will be looking at these issues and making relevant recommendations to the government.
You joined the Human Rights Commission 2 months ago. I want to know, are you satisfied the way in which the Human Rights Commission has functioned over the last few years, especially in a post-conflict Sri Lanka?
We were appointed about 2 months ago, and I think the aim is, in a way, not to look back, but to look back, yes, but in order to only figure out what it is that we need to do to move forward effectively.
Improvements can be made in certain sectors, am I right?
Yes.
What have you all done? to rectify the problems at hand?
Well, we are still in the process of getting to know the institution, getting to know the people in the institution, getting to know the activities of the institution. So as we said, one of our main aims is, until now the Commission has been looked upon only as an entity to which complaints can be submitted. And most of those complaints are about public servants, about their pensions, about their increments, transfers, etc., or about school admissions. So where the tough, difficult human rights questions are concerned, whether it's arbitrary detention or torture or discrimination of women, we really haven't received any complaints. So our purpose is to ensure that we also focus on these issues, and also primarily to be an advisor, to advise the government and advocate on certain issues.
Thank you very much. That of course was the Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Ambika Satkaranathan. I now move on to Chamatya Fernando, National Coordinator for Stop the Violence campaign. Chamatya, as an individual who is very young and who is looking at women's rights at a very young age, are you satisfied the way in which Sri Lanka is handling women's rights in the country?
Well, wishing everybody a happy new year, and I think what a way to start the new year. Hopefully wishing that this year would bring more change in the kind of the situation of women's rights, and especially when it comes to gender equality in the country. So as a young person, when I look at this kind of the fact that whether do we really have gender equality, are we kind of having finding the right solutions for the gender disparities we have in the country. I think the biggest drawback that I see is the kind of few conversations we have on the particular this, especially on gender equality and women's rights, and also a little action is being taken from where I see. And when we go and do volunteer work, especially in terms of gender-based violence and giving young people the education on comprehensive sexuality education, what I see is that the lack of awareness or the lack of knowledge in young people when it comes to these kind of issues, especially when it comes to gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health and rights. So the kind of the situation in the country from where I see is that there needs to be a lot more done to kind of bring the education and the proper kind of knowledge and awareness, especially for the young people, the ones in an age-appropriate way, so that we kind of inculcate these values in people, especially when it comes to respecting women and why gender equality should be there in a country, and how are we going to find solutions to kind of address these issues, especially when it comes to gender related.
You said, Chamatya, a little action has been taken on many fronts. What do you really mean by little action has been taken? Do you mean to say that the governments are not doing enough, the private sector is not doing enough?
Well, I would say that yes, when we compare from what was there and what we have now, I think there is a certain amount of change, but I'm pretty sure that there can be a lot more done in terms of making the kind of having stronger laws and making sure that the policies we already have, whether it be the international policies or the national policies, are implemented properly. And also when it comes to the kind of education we have, especially in the formal sector in schools, on how we have gender and sexual and reproductive health in our curriculum is not particularly enough. So if we can make sure that there is action taken towards kind of improving these areas, I think a lot more can be done on this.
Are all these suggestions practical in a country like Sri Lanka?
Yeah, of course. I mean, why not? I mean, a lot of people sometimes tend to put culture forward, saying that because of culture we have these kind of...
Culture is not important according to you?
No, definitely. I mean, I think we should take a cultural approach where we kind of find a way that we can give this education in a very culturally sensitive way, but also definitely make sure that this is definitely provided to all people.
Samantha, you said things have improved now. What do you mean by that? Is there a particular time frame that we're talking about?
Well, as a young person, from what I see, the times when I was in school and kind of trying to understand what this whole gender and what is sexual and reproductive health, because as a person who actually had the privilege of the free education in the country, and yet having not had the chance to kind of learn it at school level, but of course through my peers, and now because I'm in the kind of field, I learn about these things. So I think there is definitely kind of a change that has happened.
Thank you very much, Chamatha. I'm not going to ask you which year you left college, because that's going to be a very rude question on a show like today, on a show like this. Let's move on to Madhu Dissanayake, Director, HIV/AIDS and Advocacy, Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. Madhu, what is the role of the FPA in the country when it comes to women? Because what we hear is about the males going to the FPA and getting some advice, females going to the FPA again getting some advice, but where do you position the females in this equation now?
Well, in terms of what the Family Planning Association is all about, I think Family Planning Association, or FPA, was started 64 years ago. I think we didn't even have the United Nations office in Sri Lanka at that time. So talking about sexual and reproductive health 64 years ago was a challenge. And I don't have to say that it is a challenge even at this moment. So what do? We provide access to sexual and reproductive health as a right of all people, whether it's female, male, or young people, or older people. So when I say sexual and reproductive health, I think Chamatha did bring out the comprehensive sexuality education and the schools. All these factors actually were discussed and was provided in a certain manner, not to a large extent, up to maybe around 1970s by the Family Planning Association. But then later on it was taken over by the government as a main program, and the Family Health Bureau was started, and then the clinics were started, family planning clinics, and now you would see, if you go to any hospital, there would be a family planning clinic. If you go to any maternal and child health clinic, you would see a family planning clinic being conducted. The issue here is, what is family planning? The family planning is not only spacing children. Family planning is knowing what sort of a family you want to have. So it's a personal choice. Giving that advice, giving the necessary information to make the right decision on your own is our work. So it is not that we go and ask people to follow a certain contraceptive method or a certain number of children.
What do you ask them?
We ask that you have a child when you want to have a child, that every child should be wanted by the family.
Who has the right to decide that? Is it the male in the relationship or the female in the relationship?
I think the female has the right to decide, but if it's a family, I definitely think the family should discuss and decide, because there are lots of other factors that come into play, because it's not only about your social well-being. Your social well-being is actually about your education, your access to decent work, and poverty, getting out of poverty. So all those things are family planning.
Madhu, you said that the FPA has been in operation in Sri Lanka for 64 years, out of which you've been attached to the organization for 7 years. Are you all doing enough?
We are doing quite a lot, but we can do more.
Thank you very much. That, of course, was Madhu Dissanayake, Director, HIV/AIDS and Advocacy, Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. Also joining us this evening is Sudarshana Gunawardhan, Attorney at Law, Executive Director, Rights Now Collective for Democracy. You are the only male in this panel, Sudarshana. So let's start off with you about, do you believe that there are rights for women here in the country? Or
Yes,
do you think that there needs to be an improvement?
Yes, I do believe, because there's a basic principle, we believe that women's rights are human rights. Where you have men, you have women. In the beginning, rights were basically considered as something belong to male, because male headed households you have, and women and children were considered as not as humans, but as kind of subordinates under this male headed household. But after the Geneva Human Rights Conference, World Conference, now we all agree that women's rights are human rights. So Constitution of Sri Lanka provides that everybody has the equal protection under the law, also that it prohibits discrimination based on sex and gender. So therefore, based on the law, according to the law, there are rights for men, there are rights for women. It should be there.
Sudarshana, you said women's rights are human rights. I want to get to the exact quote that was made by Hillary Clinton a few years ago. She said, women's rights are human rights are women's rights. She was the former Secretary of State of the United States from a developed country. We're talking about an island nation which has seen war for nearly 30 decades, 3 decades, 30 years. We've seen the end of the conflict for the last 6 years or so. Is it all practical to implement here in the country?
Well,
what should be the way forward?
Yeah, no, I would like to actually quote Abraham Lincoln. When Abraham Lincoln suggested that the slaves should be free and every human being should be considered equal, there was opposition to that, especially from the slave owners from the South, who said that forefathers of the Constitution, when they say that every human being is equal, did not believe that slaves are also human. But what Abraham Lincoln said was that, well, we have to set the norm. Norm means that everybody is equal, then the implementation has to follow. So what I said was that there's a norm, the Constitution provides for that, and also various human rights conventions provide for that. The question is now we have to progress from that point, because norm has been set, implementation has to follow. So I believe that if we really work consistently, it's an achievable goal and it has to be achieved.
You said the norm has been set. What is important right now is implementation. So Abraham Lincoln made this statement several decades ago. Sudarshana, why isn't it being implemented even now?
Well, the point is that actually there is a gap, always has been the gap. As you said that there was a war and certain rights were neglected, and special rights discourse were also disturbed. It was not allowed. So now there's a space for this kind of discussion. So maybe it's a time that we take it forward and we create some kind of awareness, and then we ask people to come out and challenge. That's the way forward.
Thank you very much, Sudarshana Gunawardhan, Attorney at Law, Executive Director of the Rights Now Collective for Democracy. I am flanked by 3 beautiful women today. So now I want to get on to my immediate right. Onto my immediate left is Mahina Bounds. Nice to have you on the show, Mahina, for the first time.
Thank you, Shamir. Happy New Year, and a Happy New Year to everyone. It's good to be on the show.
And onto my far left is Stephanie Lazarus, has joined us before as well. So let's open the floor for questions from our journalists. Let's start off with Mahina.
Thanks, Shamir. Well, it's refreshing to actually, Face the Nation is more of a political show, but it's refreshing to have some space in the show to talk about an issue that can, in every sense of the word, shape politics and shape the country we live in. I have a question for Chamatya. Now, Chamatya, you work as an activist, and what I have noticed as a person who also is very passionate about this kind of this issue is that whenever you say gender inequality or, lack of women's rights, empower women, there's a lot of cynicism involved. And it's not just in Sri Lanka, but across the world, there is a lot of cynicism that is tied up with women's rights, and not many people understand why it is necessary, why is it always that women want an equal position in society. We have progressed as a world and as a society in Sri Lanka. We have progressed from where we were. But I still feel that whenever this word is brought up, there's a lot of cynicism. As activists, how do you tackle this situation?
Yeah, I think it's a very solid perspective that you brought in, because whenever, as a young person especially, when I speak about gender equality or about women's rights, or if I speak about what kind of work that I do, I mean especially as a volunteer, because I'm still studying, I'm an undergraduate at one of the national universities in the country. So when I speak about these things, always there is some kind of a idea in people that, you know, when there's so many problems in the country, whether it be the cost of living or any other kind of issue, racism and etc., so why are you all, you know, speaking about and making this such a big deal or a big issue? But something that people don't realize is that gender equality, or the women's rights, as we all know the quote of saying women's rights are human rights. So we know that how important it is for us to work towards it. And also, by achieving gender equality, there are so many other benefits as a country or as a world that we can gain. Because, I mean, whether it be so for example, if you take our country itself, the labor force, if you take the labor force, there's only 35% of females in the labor force actively participating. So now, on the contrary, but we have more girls in schools than boys, if you take the statistics. And if you take the national universities, there are 65% of the students are girls again. So how come there's less participation in the labor force? So then there is definitely an issue that we have to address. And so this is just one example. And also another thing is that, especially when I speak with boys about, I mean, I should not generalize, but when the majority of boys is that, you know, because of peer pressure, even if they feel that, you know, there should be gender equality, but still they are reluctant to speak about it openly, because they feel that, you know, they will be joked about, or they, you know, some kind of jokes would come their way, or they'll be kind of cornered or kind of bullied by their peers. So there is a certain amount of kind of, even if young people want to speak or want to take action on these things, but yet they are reluctant. I think, again, as you said, the kind of ideas or the kind of cynicism that is going around when it comes to gender equality or women's rights could be one of...
The other thing is now, what we've seen in the past is that when it comes to women's rights and empowerment of women and giving women an equal position in society, is that it was a lot of women who took the fight for it or took the lead for it. But now we've seen a complete change or a shift in activists and also rights groups who believe that it is not just the women, but it is also as important to get men into this equation, get men also involved. So Darshana, glad you're here, you're the only male in the panel. How important is a man's role in ensuring that there is rights, and that these rights for women, now you said there are rights for women and rights for men, shouldn't we also make it sound as if there is human rights, because there is no separate rights for women or men, all are equal, as we said earlier. So how are men, you know, how can men get involved in making this change, and how important is it to get men involved?
That's very, very important aspect, actually. So I'm glad to be here as a only male participant. But as you mentioned, that originally when we discuss about rights, there was a question: who are the people who have rights, who can claim rights? Because when you have the slavery, that slaves were not considered as rights holders. But more and more people claim for their rights, and they agree that everybody has to have rights. So likewise, now we call the term human rights that encompassing everybody, both men and women. So, but why there's need to be a discussion? Discussion is needed for the reason that for ages men dominated these fields. After a long time, women are coming into the scene, so they have to claim the space. So that's why that, I mean, there's no specific women's rights as such. It's human rights, as you correctly pointed out. But there's a special provision to make sure that women's rights are also ensured. That's why the UN introduced a convention Sri Lanka has also is a signatory. It's a convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. It's not Women's Rights Convention. It's a convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination, because that accepts the fact that even though that we claim there's equality, there should be equality, that there are discrimination. These discriminations are based on certain assumptions. So this discrimination has to be addressed. So men who actually have the positions of power has to come out and see that this is a struggle for human rights. It's not a women's issue anymore. It's an issue of humanity, so we have to come forward and work. To work, we have to first acknowledge that there are certain discriminations and there are certain assumptions based on that, and we have to challenge these assumptions. So in that case, men coming forward, even when we talk to the audience, when they see that men are also talking, it actually creates difference. So I think it's very important.
And you said that men in power should, you know, have an understanding about this and should get involved. However, we've noticed that most of the cases of abuse, of denial of access to basic essentials like health, to education, is not in mainly urban areas. I mean, these are issues in itself in urban areas, but the issues are more pressing in rural areas where women are not even aware of their rights, are not even aware that there is something called human rights. So what is the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission in that way doing? Because in Colombo we talk about it, and it is in Colombo, Kandy, Galle, it's known. It's a topic that we often talk about. But when you go to rural areas and you talk to these even children or women or youth, they are often unable to comprehend what is being said to them. So we speak about education, we speak about giving prominence to rights-based education and education for reproduction and sexual education in schools. But how do you implement this in rural areas, Ambika?
You are very right, because I think the plight of rural women is actually quite bad. And in terms of raising awareness, I think there has been quite a bit done in Sri Lanka, but I think the work done in rural areas has been inadequate, whether by the state or by civil society. It is also, I think, when you do these awareness raising programs, it's not merely about telling them you have these rights. Right? They are the rights holders, and you tell them that they do have the rights. But then there are others who also have kind of obligations. So these women need to know how they can exercise their rights. So where can they go to get remedies? Where can they go to get redress?
And that's a good point, because most of the time when women are subject to, and this is mostly in rural areas and not in urban areas, where women, although they are unaware of their rights, are the ones who are in these female-headed households, as you correctly pointed out, bring in a lot of contributions to economic growth through agriculture, through fisheries, through migrant work. And these are mostly women in rural areas. But oftentimes, these are the very women who have given less prominence when it comes to, if you talk about economic growth, women in rural areas are not given actually proper access to finances.
I pose a question to Amina. I'm waiting until you pose the question.
Yes, Shamir. To finances, it's important that we give a backdrop, because what is usually a problem is that these women, most often they go to the police station to make complaints, and the police is always looked at as the immediate point for redress and for advice. So in that sense, how do you see, these women having great access to the problems and, for solutions to these problems?
Yes, and for many of them actually the police might be the first point of redress, but also in certain other areas, like for instance the conflict affected areas, the police would not be the first point of redress, because there is also lack of trust. We have a trust deficit there. But it's not just the police. there are also the, at the divisional level, the divisional secretariat, the district secretariat. So I think when women try to access services, particularly women-headed households, would try to access benefits and compensation perhaps, they find that at those institutions also they're not treated perhaps with respect or with empathy. So I think the need is to create awareness not just amongst the police but also other state officials, because it's not enough for them to know how to claim their rights. The people who also hold those rights must be able to assist these women. And in relation to the Human Rights Commission and awareness raising, we've been in office only for about 2 months now, but we've already started radio spots, and these will run over several months, and they're short radio spots of a minute, and everything from freedom of expression, freedom from torture, discrimination, and we're targeting the rural areas actually. So these spots, you might not hear them in Colombo, but mostly in the rural areas through the smaller radio stations. We will be kind of rolling it out over the next few months.
So Darshana, my first question is to you. Now, we're living in a country where there are safeguards, there are law enforcement authorities, there are procedures in place, and we are also living in a country which has a very high literacy rate, Mahina. So we need to also appreciate that men, women, children, they also need to have the ability, and they do have the ability, the majority of them, to accept that they have rights and that they need to protect them if they are violated. Now, the 1978 Constitution has been in place for the past so many years. However, we will be getting an opportunity to draft a third Republican Constitution. In fact, the Parliament is being transformed into a constitutional assembly. As an attorney at law, where does our Constitution fall short?
Well, actually, it's a very good question. Our Constitution, the present Constitution, drafted in 1978. So that was a long time ago. Especially right discourse was not that strong. When we look at the international instruments, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was introduced in 1948. The legal binding documents, that is International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, both were introduced in 1966 and came into force in 1976. So our Constitution started in 1978. So you can see it's a very short period after this. Then there's a lot of jurisprudence has developed. So in that way, I think it's a new Constitution is a must, and especially we need to have a strong Bill of Rights, the Fundamental Rights chapter. So where it comes fall short on one aspect, that is that that in our Constitution it acknowledged the non-discrimination based on sex. But the gender, the concept of gender is much more broader. It is not explicitly recognized.
Right.
So that is one area, because it was not developed in that. So I think a new Constitution need to address that. And also I see the other point is the enforcement set. You have rights, the norm set, but the enforcement you have the very limited scope. For example, when a right is violated or about to infringe or infringed, then you have only 1 month period to go before the courts, and courts you have to come to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is situated in Colombo. So going back to the questions of rural women and all, there's a awareness gap, there's a capacity gap, and there's a trust deficit, and also they have to come all the way. So then we have to devise the implementation methodology. So in that way, I think the actual implementation is also falling short, I should say.
Madhu, I think I'd like your input on this. You work at the Family Planning Association, and you also work with male, female and transgender. Connecting with what Sudarshana just mentioned, do you also see this gap?
Yes, we do. We do. I think it's also because I think our understanding about sexual orientation and gender identity is quite low. And that's one of the reasons that we want to address comprehensive sexuality education in schools, because, I mean, as adults, it's very difficult for us to convince the policy makers, what is the spectrum that we are talking about, because none of us have had proper sexual and reproductive health education in schools, and then only very few who go into the areas that we are working in would be able to have a proper understanding. If not, you will see that as something taboo, and this is not something, it's not real, it's artificial, it's been brought in from other places. So the issue here is actually there are children who don't get access to education because of the fact that their gender identity and they are not recognized for access to work, accessing any kind of employment. So this is where the link needs to happen. This is where we say that gender aspect. I mean, in some constitutions they have gone much wider, saying sexual orientation and gender identities. So if we have the opportunity, I think that's where we need to look at, so that we provide what we say as human rights for all.
The President's statement recently about culture, the importance of culture being protected, how do you view this, Madhu?
I think, I mean, in terms of what I said before, is that what you're asking, sexual orientations and gender identities, and how you see culture getting affected? I don't think so. I think these are human beings who are living in this country. They are also part of the culture. They are also, they also have the same access to rights as anybody else. I mean, many of them, they challenge themselves. The self-stigma is very high because you're coming from the same society. You're not living somewhere else. So your understanding about your own orientation is also being challenged by your own perception. So, I don't think that there is an issue in terms of culture. I actually believe culture is something that is changing. We cannot have a static culture. We have had many different cultures in the history of Sri Lanka, and probably, even looking at South Asia and going beyond. So therefore, I don't see it as a challenge.
Well, thank you very much. We're going for a short commercial break. Our topic of discussion today skirts around women's rights. We're in conversation with Attorney at Law Sudarshan Gunawardana, Chamatya Fernando, Ambika Sanathiranathan, and also Madhu Naika. We're going for a short commercial break, and we will be back with more. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are on our third round. Let's start off the third round with Chamatya Fernando, National Coordinator, Stop the Violence Campaign. Chamatya, you said something very interesting in the first round. You said that more needs to be done by the government as well as the private sector, including civil society. You have onto your right the Family Planning Association, the lady who's representing the FPA, and onto your left is the lady who's representing the Human Rights Commission. If you were to give them some advice, what would that be?
I mean, I think first of all I must say that currently I think a lot of change, as I said earlier, is happening, but the question is that is it enough? So
what's the advice that you want to give them?
Yeah,
are they doing their job?
So, well, first thing, from what I say, I think a lot needs to be done on, especially in terms of the government and the other respective governmental authorities. I think it is not only the responsibility of one particular ministry, or let's say the Ministry of Women's Affairs and Child Affairs, but also this gender and the gender responsive or related work has to be mainstreamed in other areas as well, whether it be education or whether it be health or whether it be environment, all the other sectors and areas, and a lot of other governmental authorities also have to be. And one thing that I see is that sometimes when we go to these governmental authorities is the kind of knowledge or awareness that the people who are already working there, is it like, are they aware, the awareness among themselves, is it really enough? I mean,
okay, Chamatya, it's very easy to point the finger at the government. I'm talking about the civil society. Again, as I said before, on your right is the FPA.
Yeah.
Representative, on to your left is the Human Rights Commission, and on to your far right is an individual representing the Rights Now Collective for Democracy, which I believe is an NGO. What is your advice to them? It's very easy to point the finger at the government.
Yeah,
it's very easy to
definitely.
say the government is not doing enough. But you have these three individuals here right now. What would be your advice?
So the civil society, the private sector, and other, and I mean, why are we only categorizing the government, the private sector, or the civil society? I think us as a whole, as a society, I mean, all the individuals in the society has a huge responsibility. I mean, we cannot achieve gender equality if all the people don't speak about it and accept it and say that, you know, we need to have a society which is equal for both women and men. So in terms of, I think, civil society especially speaking about, I think a lot of work has been done right throughout. And as a young person, as a volunteer who's working for an organization led by girls and women, I think from our end and all the other organizations related are working hard, are kind of advocating and lobbying for these laws, for stronger laws, for the implementation of policies. But yes, as Madhu said, I think a lot more can be done as well. But the kind of, again, the kind of situation or the restrictions or reluctance in people is another factor, I think, where we have not been able to achieve our targets.
You said everyone should unite to promote gender equality. Are men doing enough?
I mean, of course, I mean, how can we speak about gender equality? I think both men and women have to be in the discussion, have to be in the conversation. And I think, again, a new area has been coming up as we see. We have a panelist also today here speaking about women's rights. So the engagement of boys and men in the field of, in kind of talking about gender equality is important, because we have to see why they are kind of, or what are the kind of perspective they have as boys or men on this.
Shamir, can I just...
Not this round, on your round, Mahina, not this round. So, Ambika, you spoke about that more needs to be done in terms of moving forward, and you said that your commission has been able to launch a campaign through the radio to reach the rural masses of this country. My question to you is, how practical is it to have a radio advert running on the radio, asking people or telling people what to do? We're talking about the rural villages, we are talking about the rural masses of this country. How practical is these measures, these mechanisms that you all put in place, the Human Rights Commission?
Firstly, that's just the beginning. After 3 months, well, not even 3 months, 2 months in office. So that is just the beginning, and hopefully we'll do more. But as to how practical it is, I think, you know, radio is one of the most practical means of doing it, because when you go out into the villages, you find that there is a radio at every tea shop, every corner. When someone's driving, they're listening to radio. And so
you find that in every house?
In the rural areas, actually, they do, because you don't find televisions. Now, let's say if you go to the north and the east, which is an area that I know quite well, there you don't have televisions in many of the houses, because many of the houses are not permanent structures, they're temporary structures, but you do find a radio. And it is not to instruct them what to do, but, you know, in simple, basic language, tell them what their rights are in relation to a number of issues. And if you listen to one of those spots, you would see it's actually very accessible. And we also give the number of our hotline if they have any complaints to make, or if they want to find out more information. We give the number of our hotline. And also, what I forgot to mention earlier is that we do have 10 regional offices spread out over the country and 5 mobile offices. And hopefully in the coming years we will, you know, increase this, but at the moment we do have that. So in that sense, we have a presence in the country, and we hope that the people in those areas will also then know where to go.
How many complaints do you all receive from the rural areas of this country?
Well, I can't think of the statistics of, but okay, if we look at, for instance, I'm going to think of the cases that we've taken on. We have about total, let's say 8,000 complaints that we still have to look at, which is kind of a backlog. Of that, 2,000 are from the rural areas, and 6,000 are from Colombo. But of those 6,000, as I said, many of them relate to public sector employees, their grievances, and
gender-based violence.
Sorry?
How many complaints do you all get?
Actually, very few. Gender-based violence, very few. torture, also...
Why? What is the reason behind this?
Well, a few things. Gender-based violence, now the role of the Human Rights Commission is to look at executive and state action. So that would be when a state official, whether it's a policeman, whether it's a member of the military, or whether it's a state official, actually violates your rights. So gender-based violence is most often, well, if it's domestic violence, it's in a way a private. It happens within the private sphere. So they can't, I mean, they can come and complain to the Human Rights Commission, but we would refer them to the police. But if it is by, let's say it's custodial, custodial rape, or if it's by, a state official, then obviously that would be a complaint that they could make to us. But yeah, that is perhaps, but generally I think the reason that women don't complain about violence is also they don't think that they will be taken seriously. In many cases there is stigma. In other cases they are economically reliant on the husband or the perpetrator of the violence and hence cannot leave. And there are times when they've actually approached the police and the police have not taken the complaints, or they've faced further harassment at the police.
Thank you very much. That was Ambika Satkunanathan, one of the commissioners at the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Sonali, for correcting me on that before. I now move on to Madhu Dissanayake, Director, HIV AIDS and Advocacy, Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. Pregnancies. Madhu, can unmarried women access the public health sector? How can teenage pregnancies be avoided? How can we move forward in these fronts?
Well, how can we avoid teenage pregnancies? With information and knowledge, definitely. Teenager is someone who considers under the age of 19. So majority of the time you're in school. So if someone who's under 19 falls pregnant, that means you haven't had good understanding or correct information while you are in school, because the current system in terms of the government system for maternal and child health, it actually looks at cohabiting or what we call the couples who are married. The eligible couples are the couples who are married. So therefore, young people or youth who are unmarried or single would not be accessing it, but I would not say that they cannot access it. They can access it. And in the recent past, there had been several changes to certain procedures also. And this was actually the Family Health Bureau seek legal guidance also on that, where the midwife could provide information and access to services for young sexually active people.
And what was the outcome of these meetings?
It's very positive, but the thing is, how often do young people get that knowledge that they can access their local maternal and child health clinic? Because again, when you say family planning or when you say maternal and child health, how often men would feel comfortable in walking into a clinic like that? Because it's so feminized, the setup. Most of the time men may not feel comfortable. So young people who want to have access, young men who want to get information on contraception would not be very...
Well, you said culture needs to change. Culture should not be static. So we should move forward, right?
Yeah, we should move forward, and I think it's where we should start is from school. We have a good curriculum. I won't say that we don't have a good curriculum. There are quite a good number of chapters that encapsulate the issues of sexual and reproductive health. The issue here is that it's not being taught well. So that's where the hitch is. So we need to address that.
Can unmarried women access the public health sector? Can they do it right now?
If you're pregnant, you definitely can access. If you need
no
information, questions will be asked. Questions. I don't say questions won't be asked. It's history taking is part of the service provision. But how comfortable would you feel
Now my question to you is very simple. Can unmarried women access the public health sector in Sri Lanka without questions being asked? Yes or no?
You can access.
Okay.
If you ask how many access, I would say
you can access without questions being asked.
yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That of course was Madhu Dissanayake, Director of Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. I now move on to Sudarshana Gunawardhan, Attorney at Law, Executive Director of the Rights Now Collective for Democracy. Can women really access, can unmarried women go to the public health sector? Now you be very honest with me, Sudarshana. Can they do it without questions being asked about the father, about what happened, about how she got pregnant? No questions are going to be asked by a doctor, no one?
No, my frank experience is that it's not that easy. By the book, yes. But if you go there, there'll be questions and you'll have to face. Because that's why these institutions itself are not neutral. Because when I answer your first question, I said that yes, everybody is equal and women and men both have rights. But the point is that institutions, these are male-made institutions. These are patriarchal institutions. These institutions carry a certain weight. So then, definitely, certain questions are being asked. I can.
But why? But why?
Yeah, it's as Madhu mentioned that there's a historical process. Because claiming, for example, I'll give you a simple example about public toilets. Until very recently, in the public bus stands, you don't get public toilets. Why? Because normally you assume that men are using these bus stations, and men, you don't need a toilet, you can just go to somewhere and just do your job. But when it comes to women, you cannot do it like that. You need a special place. So these things are needed to be introduced, and it is coming through a struggle. So,
are you saying public toilets are bad, or are you saying public toilets are good?
Sorry, public toilets are a good thing.
Okay.
But when you don't see it as a issue, you are not investing it. You have to invest, because everything, it's an investment. You need to invest on that. Now, because we discussed about this health issue, I can tell you about something from the dealing with the police. When dealing with police, everybody is under the equal protection of law. But when you come up with some kind of complaint, obviously even from the police, you get all these questions. So this discrimination is there. It's not a legal thing, it's not a formal thing, but it's there. Why it is there? On one hand, you have a law we assume that it's a equal thing, you have equality. But institutions are not neutral, and then these institutions are operate, there's an underpinning cultural norms. So these cultural norms are at play. So I should say, there's one incident in, the Variapola incident is very famous in Sri Lanka. There was a young woman was sexually harassed by a male, and she retaliated by actually attacking her. So then what happened?
This individual in question, attacking him.
Yeah. Then the police, when she went to the police, actually police arrested her and brought her before a judicial medical officer and produced before the magistrate. There was no consideration about the violation of her rights. So actually, answering your question, there are questions asked. When you do something which goes against the prevalent cultural norm, obviously.
Thank you very much, Sudarshan. I want to, before moving on to the journalist question, I want to pose that question back to Ambika. With regard to the Variapola incident, whose rights were violated? The man or the female in question?
Well, the women's rights clearly were violated because there was sexual harassment, and in our society we find that we don't take sexual harassment very seriously at all. Because even when far more serious incidents of violence against women are concerned, we don't talk about them, report them, etc., because We believe it can go against culture. You have to save face. It will break up the family, etc. So sexual harassment is really down there on the scale of importance. So clearly her rights were violated. And of course, there are people who could argue, retaliating through violence would have also, violated his rights, and violence is not the means of finding a solution. But then you also have to look at, whether the woman felt threatened, whether...
Arresting the woman, was it right or wrong?
Oh, no, obviously. I think they should not have arrested the woman and
what did the Human
her.
Rights Commission do about it?
I actually don't know, because we were not... part of the commission then. We were appointed only 2 months ago. So as to the specific action the Human Rights Commission said, obviously I cannot...
Sudarshan, 30 seconds for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So actually
to
we
respond.
intervened on behalf of the victim. So in that case, when the police was trying to arrest her, actually we informed the Human Rights Commission. Then the Secretary Samatha Jayamana, she intervened, and that actually prevented the police from keeping her at the cell, because they were planning to actually keep her under the police custody for one night. So
Thank you very much, Sudarshan, for that. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. Let's start off with Stephanie and then move on to Mahina.
Yes, Amika, no matter what policies we want implemented, or non-governmental organizations, advisory bodies, if we don't see representation, female representation in parliament, it's very tough to penetrate to that film. So my question to you is, even though we want those policies implemented, gender-based, against gender-based violence, in improving equality and promoting human rights in terms of females, on part of the females in the country, is it government's negligence, or is it the Human Rights Commission not recommending the government to really increase female representation in parliament, or are they really defying these recommendations that's being put forth by the commission itself?
Where women's political participation and representation are concerned, Sri Lanka is the lowest even in South Asia. The other countries actually much higher. We have, I think, Nepal is 33.2%, Bangladesh 19.7%, and India 10.9%. And there are multiple factors that actually prevent women's participation and representation. And as I've said many times before, one of the reasons is that although women might be organizers in political parties, they're often concentrated at the bottom rung, so they don't actually hold positions of power, which means when it comes to giving nominations, for elections, you find that they don't actually get the nominations. That is also because they might not be seen as winnable candidates, and that might also be because they don't have the financial resources or the backing to campaign, which is what we need right now in the system, a lot of money. And then of course there are the social factors in that, the violence, the election violence, which might deter some, and also within the families might not want women to enter politics. So I think there are multiple causes. So the solution can't be found by only, one of the solutions is of course quotas, which the current government has announced that they will be considering this, so that is a positive move. But then of course political parties also have to become more democratic. They have to become more gender sensitive, include women in decision making positions, and of course even within society and family. As has been said by the other panelists, education has to begin at home. And I think we come to this issue of patriarchy, which none of us have mentioned. Patriarchy, which is where you find that, in a patriarchy, the men are in control and the women are not looked upon as equal citizens, and you're always looked upon as lesser than. And those structures, that culture, that is what we need to break down. And without that, I don't think it will be possible to increase women's political representation and participation.
Yes, the government has showed interest, but is it possible to get that quota in place? As in, is it possible to lobby support at a grassroots level to appoint women to parliament or to local government bodies?
Because right now I think the recommendation or what they hope to do is relation to nomination, not the actual seats. So nominations, yes, but then will the women be able to win because they don't have resources, etc. So a more positive move might be, as they've done in many other countries, is to actually reserve seats. so a certain number of seats for women. But I would also like to come back to what you said about non-implementation. And for the Human Rights Commission, what you must understand is we are not a judicial body, so we don't issue orders. We can only issue recommendations. And in the past, one of the biggest problems we've faced is that many state entities have not abided by our recommendations. So if you want the Human Rights Commission to be strong, to protect and promote human rights, then state entities, whether it's ministries, department, the police, the military, whoever, must also abide by our recommendations.
Mahina? Yes.
Ambika, this question is to you because you spoke about gender-based violence and the role of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission in GBV. And recently, actually, mid-December, we had the 16 Days of Activism that was launched by the UN, and which many private and government organizations took on and ran with in their respective countries. And the focus was mainly on gender-based violence in education. You said that when it comes to GBV incidents, it is mostly what comes under your purview is if it is to do with local...
no, it's state or executive action. So if the actors, the perpetrators are state and not private actors.
I've got these statistics that were published recently by a civil society organization, and it was actually published last month, I think in lieu of the 16 Days of Activism. And this is a research that was done on female-headed households in post-war Ampara, Puttlam and Anuradhapura. And it was a sample of 500 to around 1,000 FHHs. And one of the statistics that were really glaring is the perception of physical security among women in post-war Ampara. And that said that only 3 female-headed households subject to violence had taken action against the perpetrators at a police station. Whereas perpetrators of violence against women from these households are relatives, commuters and security forces. And the majority are only aware of police for any form of legal redress. In Puttlam, 88% cases of domestic violence were reported among these female-headed households. And 96% of perpetrators of violence or harassment were from relatives and neighbors.
Indeed.
However, only 49% did not report violence, and 33% did that due to fear, and 2% due to disapproval by family, ignorance and language barriers. Another one, in Anuradhapura, unwelcome sexual advances are made when they visit authorities, and 25% seek assistance from police for legal remedies. However, they find that these institutions discriminate them. What does the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission do regarding this? Are we just going to say, no, we only deal with cases of government authorities or institutions, but aren't these all government institutions?
Definitely. So that's why what I meant is we do not take on individual cases, right? So that we would refer to the police. But where policy is concerned, obviously we have to and we will intervene. So for instance, if you take the police, you have currently there is also the Police Commission with which we hope to work very closely. And so increasing human rights education for the police. They currently have a police training institute, but to ensure that human rights has been integrated into that and to have constant follow-up trainings. And also the Human Rights Commission is a body that can monitor, for instance, how these, what happens at these police stations, because right now we do visits to police stations, we can do visits to prisons, detention centers and any kind of home that is run by the state. And the aim is to assess whether human rights are being violated there. So that is also another way through which we can increase our monitoring of these institutions, so that when we come across the issues, we can actually go public with them. We can have discussions with the relevant authorities. We can have discussions with the relevant commissions. So at the policy level, we will definitely be intervening.
What about creating more access for women to authorities, not just the police, but even if they're involved in agriculture? There's a huge amount of women who get involved in paddy cultivation, in OFC cultivations, in their own homes, in their own garden spaces, but actually it contributes a lot to economic development. But when they do go to authorities, authorities don't release land. If it was land that was used were under their husbands' names, but their husbands pass away, these lands don't pass over to the women. These authorities find it, they don't have confidence in women to provide women with financial support.
Definitely.
So what can the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission and you as a woman who's heading one of the commissioners of the commission, I mean, is it just going to be trainings, but isn't there more follow-up actions,
So
more
with your permission,
practical
With your
actions?
permission, I'm going to direct that question to Madhu because Ambika has been answering a lot and we have a limited amount of time. So I'm going to direct that question to Madhu. Madhu, you're a civil society activist. If you can respond to Mahina's question about women representation and what we can do, what you can do as a woman as well.
What we can do, I mean, I won't be able to say what Human Rights Commission would do, but I would always...
As a civil society
Yes,
activist.
as
Recommend,
civil...
but the Human Rights Commission could do, though.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think their mandate needs to expand. That's something that I personally believe. But in terms of civil society, I think, I mean, this is the right time. We just signed the Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years. And if we are really looking for sustainability in development within the next 15 years, issues related to women's participation in all decision-making processes is, I think, the key, should be the key. And how do we get involved in these processes as a civil society organization? I think we need to make a big more noise to get more participation, because I think now Chamatya is here, we need more activists, we need more people, more men involved in our agenda, because my personal viewpoint is that the moment you say women's rights, you are asking, and we haven't been able to take that myth away, oh, this is women's lib. You know, the gender equality and women's rights are actually, what we are talking is the same thing. But when you say gender equality, it's more palatable. The moment you say women's rights, because of the fact that we talk about rights, it's not so palatable. So we need to start, why is it so difficult for us to talk about rights? Now, for us, sexual rights, reproductive rights had been an issue, and to come out as it's a right because it's an individual's choice had been very, very challenging. So if you look at human rights, it's beyond, but for us we say every sexual rights are human rights. So getting people on board to talk about rights and violations of rights, how often do we know that our rights are getting violated, is the key thing.
Madhu, can I interrupt you there? You were talking about equal rights, and I have two questions.
Very
Twofold.
fast, Mahina.
One question
I need
is
to give
equal
Sonali
rights.
also an opportunity.
One question is perceived as, let's talk about women in pregnancy, and you work in the health sector, is that when women are pregnant, they are limited in their movements, their sort of capabilities, physical capabilities. So in that sense, is there equal rights? Can we speak about equal rights in that sense? Are women really equal to men? My second question is on culture. You said culture was not a problem, but Ambika pointed out that we have a patriarchal culture in Sri Lanka, and a big issue in that is marital rape. And what is the statistics that the FPA has on marital rape, and how is this problem seen in Sri Lanka?
Very quickly, 30 seconds, Madhu.
So in terms of pregnancy and during pregnancy, I think I do not want to say we are not equal at any moment, whether you're pregnant or not pregnant. The equity is the issue. If you need to breastfeed, or if you need to have your baby, you need to be given adequate or reasonable accommodation while working. And that's why we have certain, I mean, in the government sector, you do provide maternity benefits. You also now have come up with paternity benefits. I don't think private sector has yet come on board. But I would not say that a woman who is pregnant is unequal to any other person. So that is my answer to that. Marital rape, I have to say, marital rape is still not regarded as rape, a rape which happens within marriage. Therefore, it's very difficult for us to come up with statistical evidences, because the marital rape which gets considered in Sri Lanka at the moment is, I mean, the two lawyers might be able to clarify this, but only if you are not living under the same household where you have already declared that you are separated from your partner.
Right, so I'm going to give you a few questions as well. 2 minutes, you can round up.
Thanks, Sham. Shamatya, I have a rather unconventional question for you. You do remember the Varyapola Nangi incident.
Yeah.
Now, she became the butt end of a lot of jokes. She became a meme on Facebook as well. But she was victimized. You studied in Colombo. You're an undergraduate. You speak English. You speak Sinhalese. If this happened to you, how would you have reacted? And do you think that you have what it takes to deal with the consequences as well?
Yeah, I think a very kind of, when this particular incident happened, I think everybody started talking about it, putting on social media their kind of ideas, and we saw how some people, whether it be girls or boys, reacted to it on social media. So when we take this particular incident, I think if I was in that position, I mean, of course I must say, when as a young person, when I travel in public transport, I take public transport, this is almost like a daily basis you kind of face sexual harassment. But see, because I know what I should do in that particular situation, I would react to it. But there are a lot of people who actually don't know what they should do.
As an activist, how do you advocate for this awareness to be created among young adults who are afraid, or who are afraid of the stigma of reacting, or of responding, or of standing up for their rights?
Yeah. So one thing that I say is, one of the biggest causes is that sometimes a lot of people put this on top of culture. But I particularly think that it's the culture of silence, the culture of acceptance, and people have become so, this actually have become so normal. Like, this is like so normal to kind of face sexual harassment in public transport, or if you're walking on the streets. See, this thing, the most key thing that I say is that education, definitely. And when,
at what levels?
As I said, age appropriately. I think this, about whether it be rights, whether it be kind of speaking about respecting each other, it should start from the smallest, the youngest age level. So if we can give this an age appropriate education to all, you know, whether it be, and another thing is, when we speak about education, it's not only the formal education. Why are we only saying, oh, the government or the Ministry of Education have to put the comprehensive sexuality education about rights, about gender? But yes, there are other sectors like informal education where you learn from. See, then comes media. From, like, because a lot of people, young children or adults, watch television, they listen to radio. And another one is that non-formal education. And I, as a volunteer who work on this field and who is passionate about it, we have at Girl Guides, we have a non-formal education curriculum which is called Voices Against Violence, where we actually give this education and take a right-based and more gender-responsive approach to it, and in an age-appropriate way. So I think one of the biggest solutions to this problem would be the kind of awareness and education to all levels.
Ambika, my last question is to you. By your own admission, there's a backlog of 8,000 complaints at the HRCSL. You also said that the most it can do is to offer recommendations, and most of the time these don't even get respected. So would I be correct in saying that the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka has no teeth? If so, why aren't you advocating for reforms with respect to the Act?
I think that is something that is actually part of our work plan, to advocate for reforms, as Madhu also said, to make to include ways in which the Human Rights Commission can ensure that its orders are implemented. So that is definitely on the cards. But in terms of the fact that it doesn't have teeth, I think also we must not always look at only punitive action to make people, respect, protect human rights. I think the important thing is to develop an inherent respect for the rule of law, for the protection and promotion of human rights.
Thank you very much. We move on to the final round. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we're in conversation with 3 ladies and 1 gentleman about women's rights. All this and more after this break. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Each speaker would get 1 minute in the final round. We start off with Sudarshana Gulwardhan, Attorney at Law, Executive Director, Rights Now Collective for Democracy. Sudarshana, what is the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka?
Well, I think we are, after a decade of uncertainty, we are on the right tracks. Because we are actually trying to reform the constitution and also trying to create a culture of rule of law. So way forward is that people should come forward. So how people can come forward? That they have to form their own organizations, civil society organizations. And government should respect their right to organize, their right to speak freely, and their right to raise their concerns. When the organizations raise these things, actually institutions like Human Rights Commission and other institutions will have to take it forward. Because there's no point pointing fingers at each other. Now we have a space, we have to struggle to make the best of it. So I think that's the only way forward. Every individual citizen has to come forward. And especially since we are discussing about the women's issue, that women, more than half of the population, should come forward, and men should acknowledge the fact that there's a need for them to accommodate it. So that's the only way forward.
Thank you very much, Sudarshana, for your thoughts and for joining us this evening. I now move on to Madhu Disanayaka, representative from the Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. Madhu, you said that there is cultural policing taking place right now in the country. Most of the individuals don't go to the police because, or the public health sector, because of cultural issues, cultural norms being violated. Do you think sex work in Sri Lanka should be legalized? Time starts now.
Well, as a public health person, if I say the sex work should be legalized in order for people to access health services, it's my personal perspective, because the issue we are having here is that whether it should be decriminalized or whether it should be legalized, I don't know. We may have to have many discussions on this whole issue. But there is a huge public health concern. And since we are working on HIV prevention, we feel that for us to provide services, there should be a mechanism where we identify people, where we know who these people are, so that they can, without any prejudices, without any discrimination, without any stigma, they could walk into the service providers and access their services. Therefore, I think we need to look at what needs to be done in order to address the current prevailing situation of public health.
Thank you very much, Madhu, for your thoughts and for joining us this evening. It was a pleasure having you on board as well. I now move on to Ambika Satkaranathan, one of the commissioners at the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Darshana said more has to be done. Chamatya said more has to be done by the authorities. Madhu, in fact, said that the mandate of the Human Rights Commission should expand. All guns are pointing at you. Tell me, what has to be the way forward?
What has to be the way forward? I agree with all of them that we do need to do a lot more, and I think the first step is also for the Human Rights Commission to build strong partnerships with civil society so that we can work together. The other would be to strengthen the mandate of the Human Rights Commission to find ways to ensure its recommendations are implemented, and then also for the Human Rights Commission to function in a more transparent manner, and also to play a more active role in advising the government and in making recommendations to the governments about legal reform, about ratification of international treaties, and encourage the government to actually abide by its international obligations.
What do you think should the Human Rights Commission do at this point of time? Take into account the incidents that have taken place, the Vidya's case in Jaffna, what happened a few months ago with regard to, say, Sadomi. Many incidents of this sort have taken place in Sri Lanka. What must your commission do?
What must we do? I think, do you mean specifically in relation to violence against women?
That's right.
In relation to violence against women, I think we have to undertake more active, visits, monitoring visits to police stations, to prisons, to detention centers. We have to sensitize the police and the service providers. We have to ask the government to set up shelters and to also provide economic, livelihood opportunities for women so they can leave violent situations. Those are just a few things. And of course, legal reform.
Thank you very much, Ambika, for your thoughts and comments. I wish you all the very best to ensure that the recommendations that you said right now will be implemented. And I hope and pray that you get the strength and you would last at the Human Rights Commission, taking into account the political culture in Sri Lanka. When you want to do something, when you want to bring in change, there's always some sort of resistance. So all the very best to you. And let's finish off today's session with Chamatya Fernando, National Coordinator for Stop the Violence campaign. My question to you is very direct. As a youth activist, what is the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka? 6 years following the end of the conflict, 3 decades of war, what is the way forward?
I think as a young person, from my perspective, I think especially when we speak about gender equality or about women's rights, there are certain areas that we should look into, especially when it comes to raising awareness and also having proper education or giving the knowledge and the skills to understand their rights and what needs to be done and to prevent and to protect themselves and the community itself. And also a lot of strong research and policy development specifically on this kind of related areas, and also the kind of the importance that we give to advocate and to strengthen the civil society or the private sector, as well as to kind of have a more holistic approach to this, where all the stakeholders play a important and responsibility. They take their responsibility, whether it be the government, whether it be the private sector, whether it be the media or the society as a whole. Take this initiative and move forward, because we have to make sure that we live in a world where we don't have to speak about gender inequality, or because we should live in a world which is free from violence or harassment and everybody is able to enjoy their full rights.
Thank you very much, Chamatya, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, ladies. That is Chamatya, Ambika, and also Madhu for joining us this evening. Not forgetting Darshana, of course. Darshana, thank you very much for joining us this evening as well. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thanks a lot, Mahina, for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you again on the show. And also Sonali Wanagabaduge for joining us this evening. She is a lawyer by profession. That's why the questions are very, very technical at times. But thank you very much, Sonali, for joining us this evening. Our expertise are quite welcomed on the show as well. 2016, I spoke of a book at the start of this program. We will open a new book today. We will indeed open a new book, and the words on this book will be put by us, by you at home. So remember that this book is called The World of Opportunity. It's called The New Year's Diary. It's called The Future. Ensure and make sure. At the end of the day, this book in question would determine who you are. And you at home should be proud of it. Thank you very much. 2016. Happy New Year. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Same time, same place. This is Face the Nation.